Hey, Noah. Welcome, everybody. You're watching Modern Aging. This is our guest, Noah Rasheta. He is the host of Secular Buddhism podcast, as well as the author of several books on secular Buddhism. Welcome. How are you doing today, Noah?
Doing well, thank you.
You're
How are
here.
you?
I'm good. I'm here in New York City, and you're there in
I,
Playa,
Playa del Carmen, about an hour south of Cancun.
in Mexico, which is a much better place to be right now, I think, than in New York City.
Yes.
But thank you so much for coming on and talking with us. I know we had known each other because we did our House Hunters International episode together, which was really fun. And you also are a power motorer,
Yes.
as well as a Buddhist.
That's right. Meditating in the air.
Meditating in the air, it can always be a good thing. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what is secular Buddhism and how it may be able to help many of us who are perhaps suffering from feeling a little bit lost and feeling confused and trying to make sense of what's going on today. So maybe we can just kind of start at the beginning, give a little bit of context for people. Hold on one second. Hold on one second. Okay. Oops. Okay, I just want to make sure that people can see us or hear us. If anybody can write something in the comments section so we know that there are people out there, that would be helpful. So Noah, why don't you just tell us a bit about how you discovered Buddhism and what secular Buddhism is as opposed to, how it differentiates itself from other sects.
Okay, sure. For me, the journey into exploring Buddhism started around 2010. And it had started just with this idea that most of us know that meditation is supposed to be this thing that's helpful during difficult times. And that's how it started for me, going through a difficult time and wanting to find more peace, more contentment, and exploring this thing called meditation. So the more I learned about meditation, the more I learned about the origins of it. And that led me down the path of exploring Buddhism. And at the time, I knew I wasn't really interested in any isms in my life. I had had an experience with religion that left me not very eager to find a religion per se, but I was very interested in finding what aspects of this path might be beneficial for me. And that's where the idea of approaching Buddhism from a secular lens kind of emerged. And the whole idea was extracting some of the core Buddhist teachings and philosophies and presenting them in a way where the listener can understand that you're just learning this not with the goal of becoming a Buddhist, but with the goal of benefiting from these concepts and ideas. And that's why I call it secular Buddhism. It's not necessarily another type of Buddhism. I'm just explaining Buddhist concepts and ideas and presenting them in a secular lens to an audience that may not be interested in anything that sounds like religion.
Right. So what are the basic concepts that you're talking about then?
So the core concepts that we talk about in Buddhism in general have to do with the notion of suffering, the idea that in life difficulties arise, and when they do, there are techniques and concepts and ideas that help us to overcome those difficulties, or to, I guess we could say, to no longer experience the suffering that we may have been experiencing. And it starts there. That at its core, that's what it is. It's the study and the understanding of the nature of suffering, the cessation of suffering, the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. And it's a really fascinating thing, because on the surface you would think, well, wait a second, how, we talk about how the moment we want life to be other than how it is, that's the feeling that we're talking about that we would define as suffering. But if I want it to be other than how it is, that wanting is already creating the very suffering. To not want to suffer is to suffer.
Right.
So it kind of creates this interesting catch-22. And that's where the techniques and the concepts of Buddhism to me are so fascinating, because then you start to look inward and see, well, what are the sources or the causes of my craving? Why do I want things to be different than how they are? And that becomes a fascinating journey. So if I were to tell someone, like in a nutshell, what this is, it's the difference of seeking something outside and learning to understand what's going on inside. And I tell people all the time, it's not about discovering some great mystical secret out there. All we're trying to do in this practice is understand ourselves a little bit better, the nature of my thoughts and feelings and emotions, the inner workings of my own mind. So, as you develop these techniques and you practice, the only thing you're really going to get to know is yourself a little bit better, and that's about it.
Right, which is really valuable, though, right?
Absolutely.
I think it's a lifelong quest that many of us have. I mean, so how do you
Absolutely.
translate this to, say, you have young children who may or may not really understand what's going on, but how do you explain this concept to your kids, for example?
Okay, so that's a great example. With my kids, so one of the things we talk about in Buddhism in general is this concept of right view or skillful view. And the idea is that we tend to see life a certain way, and that might not be how life actually is. And one example is life is interdependent. And the thing that I'm looking at, using my kids as the example, this is how I practice with them. We'll pick an object in their room, like their stuffed animal, and we'll say, when we look at this, we typically see what? And they'll say it's a stuffed animal. Well, but if we look deeper, what is a stuffed animal? Where did this come from? What's inside of it? And, the buttons for the eyes, where did those come from? You start to see it in terms of the interdependent nature of the stuffed animal. And then they start to see this thing that they have, right, that's connected to someone in a factory who made it, a pilot who flew it in an airplane or brought it in a boat, and like all these moving parts that made this thing exist. And it's been fascinating because you can see the change in their relationship with that stuffed animal, because now it's not just the stuffed animal. It's like, well, this is a lot of things. And that's kind of the practice, that we're trying to see all things that way, as interdependent, rather than this is this and that is that.
So it's almost like you have a deeper consciousness and appreciation for everything, actually, if you start to think of things, in that way. So in terms of this global pandemic, which is not an object, how can we think of this pandemic in a way that doesn't has us looking inward, or doesn't have us kind of spinning out of control and feeling like we're suffering and so much that there's nothing we can do?
Yeah, well, any instance of that breaks us out of our routine, habitual way of being is an invitation to learn something about ourselves. Mm-hmm. And with this pandemic, I think there are two different approaches. One is, we can recognize almost immediately the interdependent nature of life, right? It used to be easy to think, well, if someone gets sick over there, that doesn't affect me. And we're seeing very quickly that that's not the case, because everything affects everything else. But in terms of looking in, it's been fascinating to use this as an invitation. Now that we're at home, for example, and we're dealing with new routines, the ordinary processes that I get to go through on a day-to-day basis have been disrupted. So now I'm stuck at home with a new routine. There's a lot of discomfort around that. And that's an invitation to learn something about myself. Why does this bother me? Why does it upset me if the kids are being loud while I'm trying to do work? Or, again, not with the intention of solving anything. It's with the intent of understanding myself a little bit better, with the overall goal of I'm trying to be a more skillful version of myself, a more skillful dad, a more skillful spouse, employee, whatever it is. And I can only do that by understanding myself a little bit better.
We actually talked about that a little bit, about the difference between trying to be better and then trying to be more skillful, and how
Mm-hmm.
these words matter in terms of our outlook or how we perceive something or perceive a situation. So can you go into that a little bit more about what you mean by more skillful, or why is
Sure.
it important to think of it as skill as opposed to, you know, just being a better person or whatever?
Sure. Yeah, in Buddhism, there's this strong concept or teaching of non-duality. And the overall way to think of this is that in the world of duality, we're thinking right and wrong, good and bad, in terms of those types of definitions of opposites. And from the Buddhist perspective, because the nature of things being interdependent, there's this understanding that you can't have right without having wrong, right? Something being wrong is what makes something else that's not wrong be right. So you cannot have one without the other. So the idea of starting to change our mentality around seeing things strictly in their dualities of good and bad, right and wrong, we focus on skillful versus unskillful. And I think that language makes it a lot more beneficial to be able to work with these ideas in the roles that we play. For example, as a dad, if I were thinking, oh, I'm a bad dad versus, oh, I'm a good dad, both of those are probably wrong in the sense that there's no bar that says, okay, now you're a good dad. It's but I can always be more skillful, right? And I'm the one who gets to work on that and decide that. Am I as skillful as I can be doing what I'm doing now, or could I do something a little bit better? And I think that's an important distinction.
So, as from the Buddhist perspective, how can we view, or yeah, how do we view uncertain times? Something where, you know, honestly, we don't really know what next week is going to look like, or even tomorrow at this point. You know, I think there was a bit more predictability, or there was an illusion of predictability before.
Yeah.
Is there a way that you think about that in a different, with a different
Yeah, definitely.
lens?
Definitely. So I like that you used the word illusion, because it was an illusion to think that, you know, our idea of normal and that feeling of certainty that we felt we had was always an illusion. And you can see this going back in time and history. You know, there's never been a guarantee of things being right, whether it's a world war or the Black Plague or the invasion of the Mongols. You know, there's always been these instances of disruption. And so the one of the stories that I really enjoy, it's a Chinese parable that has kind of weaved its way into several Buddhist stories as well, is the what we call the parable of the horse. And the story goes that there was a farmer, and a horse showed up in his field one day, and he took the horse, and the neighbor was like, "Hey, you got a horse, that's incredible." And he replied, "Well, who knows what is good and what is bad," and went on his way. And then the next day the horse left, and the neighbor was like, "Oh no, the horse you had left, that's horrible." And he's like, "Well, who knows what is good and what is bad?" The horse comes back with additional horses, and now the neighbor's like, "Now you've got a bunch of horses, that's great." He says, "Who knows what is good and what is bad?" His son ends up trying to work with one of the horses and falls off and breaks his leg. And the neighbor says, "Oh no, your son, your only helper, broke his leg. This is bad. Who knows what is good and what is bad?" The next day, the army comes in to conscript the youth. They can't take his son because he has a broken leg. The neighbor comes running over, and at that moment realizes, yeah, who knows what is good and what is bad. And that, paraphrasing the story, but the overall idea is that we see life from such a narrow vantage point. I can experience it from where I am, and based on my views, my beliefs, my very limited understanding of my place in the world gives me a picture, and I'm the one who's giving it meaning, saying this thing is good, this thing is bad. But when we scale back and we see the big picture, we don't know what is good or what is bad. Where does this lead? What happens next? And that's a fun way to see life. It's just, I talk about this often, the analogy that life is like a game of Tetris. And the problem is that we think we're playing chess. If I do this, life will counter with that. And somehow I can beat the game. And the truth is, in Tetris, you don't beat the game. You play and play and play until it's game over. And that, to me, is a lot more like life. Pieces show up, and sure, there's the illusion of control because I can kind of move this around and twist it around to make it fit the best way I can. But at the end of the day, there's no guarantee of what shape shows up next. And we're all experiencing that right now, right? None of us, you don't know what's coming around the corner. And suddenly you're in a position where all we can do is deal the best we can with the pieces that we have right now. And that to me is very much like the Buddhist approach to life. Rather than sitting down and saying, that's a bad piece or this is a good piece, I want more of these, I want less of those. We don't decide that. Life throws the pieces at us, and we try to be skillful with how we move those pieces.
But I feel like sometimes like we can do that, right? So I can try to keep my family safe. We can wear masks. We can try to, we stay inside as much as possible. But then we feel like there's like other people that may not have the same philosophy, right? So they're walking around close to people or not, and not wearing a mask and that sort of thing. And, my reaction, of course, is always like, what are you doing? Like in those kind of situations, how do you get yourself, like, I guess I'd want to know personally, like, how do I calm myself down without being reactive, right? I saw a fight in the park just the other day, actually. My husband and I were walking the dog, and, these 3 people were not wearing masks, and this guy walked over, started screaming at them, and then they were screaming back, and then it just became like this crazy altercation when it didn't need to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's natural when it's hard because we again, going back to the unique vantage point, you have a way of understanding what's going on that's filtered by everything you've heard, everything you've watched, your understanding of sciences or whatever, and that gives that's your way of navigating through this world. And then right here next door, maybe someone who doesn't understand any of those things, doesn't care, and unfortunately may walk around and thinks this is no big deal, I'm not wearing a mask. And you can't do anything to force them, right? You can't change someone's view. You can't hand somebody understanding. So in those instances, I mean, to recognize in yourself the wanting right away to change the other is something that you can learn about you. Why does this matter so much to me? There are reasons why it matters to me. I don't want my loved one to get sick, for example. So that helps you to understand the source of the anger or the source of the frustration if it's really high. Now, I don't know what the answer is of what you say to that person. I'm not even going to try to go there. All I'm trying to get at with this whole technique is there's always something I can learn about me. What does this say about me? My thoughts, my feelings, my actions. That's the only realm I have to work with anyway, not someone else's. So very personal. Now, where that line is, well, now I should say something, I don't know. That's what you get to decide in your circumstances with that specific instance, and I handle mine in my circles of of the circumstances I'm in. But if all of us were trying to be a little bit more skillful, that would actually be really cool. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way.
Right. Well, Susan, thanks for your question. So she asks, are there questions we can ask ourselves to bring our minds to a more peaceful place during conflict, change, and uncertainty?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Susan. I think there are one of the questions that I like to ask myself quite regularly as part of my day-to-day practice is to ask myself, what did it take for this moment to arise? And I can do this whether I'm looking at an object like my cell phone or, whatever it is, or circumstances, being at the park. You can pause, see that fight taking place, and you can say, what did it take for this moment to arise? That mental exploration that's going to now start to go into the causes and conditions of this thing, that alone gets us thinking in terms of impermanence. and recognizing this is because that is, and that is because of that, and that's the practice. It helps us to start to see through the bigger picture. So that's a question I like to ask myself a lot. And I've had really neat moments in my day pausing and asking, what did it take for this moment to arise? Or what did it take for this feeling to arise, or this thought to arise? There are different variations of it, but that's one question.
So I guess, if you train yourself to ask those questions at these particular moments, I guess, do you find yourself kind of detaching from the heat of the moment? Whether, I don't know, it doesn't necessarily have to be the heat of the moment, but like, I guess it helps you to look a little bit, like, to step back just by simply asking that question.
I think it does, because I think, typically as we go through life, we are the experiencer of emotions. And every now and then, if we can pause, we can observe that we're experiencing the emotion. And that, to me, is the separation. That is the difference of recognizing I'm experiencing anger, and then recognizing I'm observing that I'm experiencing anger. But when I'm in observer mode, the observer isn't angry. The observer's always neutral. And I can observe that anger is something I'm experiencing, and that simple distinction, that simple separation between observer and experiencer may give me the ability to be a little bit more skillful with what I'm going to do next, what I'm going to say next, what I'm going to do next. And that's the idea, breaking the chain of our habitual reactivity. Because if we don't do that, we're always reacting. You say this, which makes me think that, which makes me feel this, and it's just a chain, right? And it goes so fast that we don't even realize that that's what we're doing. We're just habitually reactive all day. And the technique of putting in these pauses and practicing is that I might be able to step back for a moment, observe what I'm experiencing, and then take a skillful action next. Where before it still could have been an action, but maybe not as skillful, because it would have been a reactive action rather than a skillful, deliberate action.
Right. No, absolutely. I live in New York City. We have a lot of reactive people in this city. So would you say that meditation helps with creating that skill?
I think it does. And the reason why is because, again, going to this concept of reactivity becoming habitual, we're not used to pausing. We're not used to stopping and noticing what we don't notice. We don't even know that we don't notice. We don't notice that we don't notice. And because that's just the way that we are. So when you practice deliberately stepping back, like you do in meditation, and pausing that starts to become the new norm. And then it becomes easier to find yourself in moments where you normally wouldn't have noticed, and to say, what's actually happening here? Because you get used to putting yourself in observer mode and not just reaction mode.
Exactly. Krista, thank you. She says, I've been struggling with being frustrated at others, not taking this seriously enough to, and have reminded myself I cannot control the actions of others, only myself. Very true. So Susan's asking, how can we learn to stop being so hard on ourselves and criticizing ourselves and others, instead be more compassionate? I mean, how do you practice compassion, especially when maybe it's just, I don't know, the energy is just so high, intense.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question.
I guess, I do have a lot of compassion for the elder, neighbors that I have, some, friends, families that I know who are not financially secure. I work in freelance. There's thousands, millions of freelancers that have no work. Not even freelancers, there's a lot of people who are not at work. So that sort of thing I have a lot of compassion for. Is it the sort of thing where you just try to just pivot your focus? I don't know. I feel like that's something that's a little bit easier said than done.
Sure. So my understanding and my experience when it comes to compassion is that it arises naturally. And I think sometimes we get caught with this way of thinking that says I should be compassionate. I should be feeling compassion. So I may find myself in a situation where I'm not feeling it, but I think I should, so I'm faking it.
Mm.
And we do this with ourselves a lot. So the practice, and if we're looking at this from the Buddhist perspective, it would, if I'm trying to observe what is might be that I'm not feeling compassion. And then that gives me room to explore. I wonder why. Why do I not feel compassion for this group of individuals, but I do for this other group? And I might learn something in that and recognize. So it'll be through the understanding, with enough understanding, compassion will arise naturally. And this kind of gets at, there's a quote that Thich Nhat Hanh, a Zen Buddhist, talks about often, where he says, the more you understand, the more you love. And the more you love, the more you understand. And I think with compassion, it's the same. It arises out of a place of love, but we can't fake it. So if I want to feel more compassion, what I need is more understanding, which is going to take time and effort on my part to get to know, why do you view it this way, or why are you doing what you're doing? Then compassion can arise. And I think, so directing this back to ourselves, how do we have more compassion for ourselves? Similar. Let's say I'm going through an intense emotion that I'm feeling with this situation with the pandemic, and I'm upset at I may be upset, but if I look a little deeper, I'll find that I'm actually upset, and I'm upset at myself for being upset.
Right.
Because maybe somewhere in the back of my mind is this idea that I'm not supposed to be the kind of person who's upset. So if we were to look at it from that angle, then what you're left with is, if I'm just practicing being the observer, it's okay to be upset. Why wouldn't you be upset? We're going through a really difficult thing. But if you're upset because you're upset, now that's a whole new layer that may be unnecessary and unskillful. But all it takes to unlock that is to observe that, oh, well, I'm upset because someone deep down many years ago instilled this idea in me that I'm not supposed to be upset. Oh, okay, well, then that's the problem. And then you're just left with the first level of the instance that you're going through, which is, I'm just upset because of what we're going through. And that's different.
Wow.
And I think compassion arises naturally when we start to see that in ourselves. With anything, I can be anxious, and then I can be anxious that I'm anxious because somewhere I've got this idea that anxiety is something that you're not supposed to feel, or that weak people feel, or that, you know what I mean? You can get so lost in these ideas that are just ideas, when the observer can just sit there and say, I'm experiencing anxiousness. Okay, why? Oh, because I might lose my job. Oh, okay, well, that makes sense. No wonder I'm feeling anxious. And now I'm okay to be feeling anxious, but I'm not adding to it. I'm not feeling unnecessary anxiety, which would have been that deeper layer, right? The anxiety about feeling anxiety.
Right. No, and I feel like that's what a lot of people are doing. They're like spinning themselves because they're watching the news, and then they're going online, and then they're talking to this friend and that friend, and they're just like, there's just so much information out there. So I feel like we all need a timeout, right? Just to like sit and think and just, how can we use this time that we're spending time at home to meditate, to ruminate on how maybe we can make better decisions for ourselves in our lives, and that we're not so much on autopilot. And so I'm wondering, like, is there a way, so is that something in terms of Buddhist thought that can be incorporated into our lives? Or there's like simple things that we can kind of maybe ask ourselves on a daily basis as we're kind of going through this, that you suggest, whether it's,
Yes, definitely. So this, again, kind of going to the question of, prompting yourself with a question. It could be, what am I experiencing in this moment? And this is really helpful to do if you can do it when you're experiencing a difficult emotion. At first, it might be hard, and it's not till after, an hour after I said the thing I regret, and I'm playing it all back in my head. Maybe I do it then. But with time, you can develop this skill to where it happens in the moment. You're saying, wow, I'm starting to feel a very strong emotion right now. What exactly am I feeling? The moment I do that, I'm analyzing it in my mind. Here's what I'm feeling. Here's where I'm feeling it. Here's probably why I'm feeling it. And that process of observation already creates a little bit of distance between what I'm experiencing and the observation of what I'm experiencing. And I think that's a very beneficial practice right now with what we're going through. You can do this watching the news, and boom, there goes the headline, or somebody says something, and you feel that instance of, oh, strong emotion. Pause right there and be like, what exactly am I experiencing? Describe it to yourself as if you were writing in a journal. Here's what I'm feeling. Here's where I feel it. It's this thing in my heart or in my chest, or just, analyze it.
What, how you're feeling it physically, you mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Because we experience emotions and thoughts, and sometimes we don't realize that, oh, that specific feeling, I feel it in my shoulders. My shoulders get tense, or my jaw. But if I pay attention, I might notice, oh, when I'm really angry, my jaw gets really tight. And by noticing that, I might loosen up my jaw, and that might be enough to feel a little bit less anger. And again, the goal isn't to not feel these things. The goal isn't to say, hey, if you do this, you're not going to be angry about this anymore. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the opposite. I want to welcome whatever I'm experiencing. And if I'm experiencing anger, quit trying to push it away and say, I am really angry. Well, that's perfectly okay. Now let's look at why. Where's this coming from? Not with the goal of getting rid of it, but with the goal of understanding it. And with that understanding, the change, that part's inevitable. Just like clouds come and go, emotions and feelings come and go. And if we sit with them long enough, we'll notice that they came, they lingered, and then they left. But if they're there and we're fighting them, that's not skillful. And that might be adding those secondary layers. Right now, there's this feeling, and I'm angry because I'm feeling this feeling, and that's a whole new feeling.
So, Beln is, thanks for watching. He asks, or she asks, so how long do you feel that way? I guess as long as you do.
When you're observing, who knows? It could be 5 seconds. It could be a few minutes. It could be that you have this experience that lingers for a day or two, just because you sat there and you observed something and something clicked in your mind and you thought, oh, and that gives rise to a certain feeling. Yeah, it could last. It could be super fleeting for seconds. It could be days. It could be weeks. It could be the rest of your life. You'll never see something the same because you sat there and observed it in a way that changes the way you see that. So I'd say anywhere across the board, from instant to lifelong.
And maybe it gets faster, like that time period gets shorter as you practice more.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about, so we're going to start to wrap this up, but your podcast, the Secular Buddhism podcast. So what types of things do you explore on the podcast?
So in the podcast, what I typically do is I'll take a specific Buddhist teaching or a story or a concept, and then that episode will focus on that one idea, and I'll talk about typically how that applies to everyday life, and usually through the lens of my own life. I'm not sitting in a cave meditating somewhere. I'm a dad who has a job, who has all the normal things that most of us kind of go through. So I'm trying to take these concepts and ideas and apply them to my everyday life. And I think that's one thing that's resonated a lot with people who listen to the podcast, is that you're learning about these concepts and ideas from the lens of someone who also has days that he doesn't like to go to work, or has days that he wants to throw the kids' toys away because I stepped on it one too many times, or all those things, right?
Right.
So that's the idea. It's a form of Buddhism applied to everyday life, and it's one topic at a time on the podcast.
And your books, you actually have your one book, Secular Buddhism. It's like a beginner's guide to Western minds or something like that, right?
Yeah, so that was Secular Buddhism was kind of just laying out the general ideas of Buddhism, and then that evolved into No-Nonsense Buddhism for Beginners, which is my second book, and that one is like a question and answer format exploration to what are the key core concepts, teachings, practices of Buddhism. And then I have a third book, which is the 5-minute mindfulness journal, and that one's intended to be a companion to practicing meditation and practicing the to try to live a more mindful life.
That's great. And we'll put the links in the description section so you can check them out if you're interested. And wow, thank you so much, Noah. This is super, super helpful. And, who knows? I learned something from this. I know that. So I'm going to apply it to my real life. So thank you so much. I don't know. Welcome. I don't know if there's any last minute thoughts at all that you just want to leave us with.
One thing, last thought. This is the idea, another question that you can kind of ask yourself as you go through things is, what am I not noticing? And again, trying to get back to this idea that as we experience these difficult emotions or difficult circumstances, rather than thinking I'm supposed to not be worried or not be upset or not, I'm not trying to change anything. I'm trying to take whatever is and ask what else? What am I not noticing? So an example of that would be, I'm feeling nervous about, this is right now real life, right? I'm feeling nervous about several of my internet jobs that have stopped. And I don't know what I'm going to do to supplement that. Sure, that's a real legitimate concern. And I'm noticing that I don't have a toothache. And that recognition of the non-toothache is a moment of mindfulness. It's a moment that allows me to feel gratitude in spite of fear, uncertainty. That's all still there. I'm not pushing that away. But I'm also recognizing, but I'm really grateful I don't have a toothache. Or in my case right now, a sore throat. Because last week I had a really bad sore throat for about 4 days. And I couldn't swallow. And it wasn't till the day that I could finally eat food again that I was like so grateful that I can just eat food right now. And how long will that last? I don't know. Probably a few days and I'll forget. But anytime I can ask myself, what am I not noticing? That's an invitation to experience something beyond whatever I'm already experiencing. So that would be my final thought. Like whatever we're all going through right now, the difficulties, the fear, the anxiety, that's all natural. It's normal. We don't have to push that away. Allow it to be what it is. But then ask ourselves, what am I not noticing? And we may notice things like the non-toothache that can give us a few moments of gratitude for the non-toothache.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Noah. That's a great way to end the show. And so if anybody wants to reach you, how do they reach you?
The easiest way is to just visit secularbuddhism.com. And there they can find a link to listen to the podcast if they want to do that, or links to the books if they want to explore those.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. We're so appreciative. All the comments and reactions. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time on Modern Aging. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.